March 1944. A farm boy from Nebraska proposed something ridiculous: capture enemy officers alive, using nothing but rope, physics, and timing. The brass dismissed him as naive. Traditional military doctrine relied on overwhelming firepower, not playground mechanics. But 6 months later, intelligence reports confirmed something impossible. 5 high-ranking officers vanished in a single night without a shot fired, leaving an entire division paralyzed and confused. The enemy never understood what hit them. March 14, 1944, 06:30 hours, Fort Benning, Georgia, 52nd degraph, overcast, smell of fresh coffee and diesel fuel. Corporal James "Jimmy" Hewitt stood outside the command tent, gripping a hand-drawn schematic that senior officers had already rejected twice. At 23, the Nebraska farm boy possessed something the military hierarchy didn't value: an intimate understanding of motion, tension, and leverage developed through years of rigging equipment on his family's wheat farm outside Grand Island. His calloused hands told stories of barn construction, hay baling systems, and improvised machinery repairs that kept a struggling farm operational during the Depression. Inside the tent, Major Douglas Patterson reviewed casualty reports with growing frustration. The 509th Parachute Infantry Battalion faced a systemic problem that conventional tactics couldn't solve. Behind enemy lines in the European theater, American paratroopers excelled at disruption but struggled with intelligence gathering. Killing enemy soldiers was straightforward. Capturing officers alive for interrogation required close-quarters engagement that resulted in prohibitive casualties. The mathematics were brutal. Attempting to capture a single German officer typically cost 3 American lives, and success rates hovered below 35%. Intelligence Division desperately needed prisoners who possessed operational knowledge: battalion commanders, logistics officers, communications specialists who carried encryption information. But frontline doctrine prioritized overwhelming firepower over surgical precision. The established approach involved heavy suppression, flanking maneuvers, and overwhelming force. It worked for territory control, but destroyed the very intelligence assets command needed most. Patterson had reviewed 12 proposed solutions in 3 months. Each followed conventional military thinking: improved close-quarters weapons, enhanced night vision equipment, specialized assault training. Each proposal required months of development, significant budget allocation, and uncertain outcomes. Meanwhile, the intelligence gap widened. Allied forces advanced through France with incomplete information about enemy strength, positioning, and intentions. The cost of this ignorance was measured in American lives lost to unexpected resistance and missed opportunities to exploit enemy weaknesses. Hewitt had approached Patterson twice before with his unconventional concept. Both times the major dismissed him politely but firmly. A rope-based capture system sounded like something from an adventure novel, not serious military doctrine. Officers trained at West Point didn't implement playground mechanics on European battlefields. The first rejection came with a lecture about military tradition. The second included a suggestion that Hewitt focus on duties appropriate to his rank. But the farm boy possessed the stubborn determination characteristic of Midwest agricultural communities. His family survived the Dust Bowl by refusing to accept defeat, by finding creative solutions when conventional approaches failed. His father taught him that impossible problems often yielded to unconventional thinking, that physics didn't care about tradition, and that simple systems often outperformed complex machinery, precisely because simplicity meant fewer failure points. The breaking point came March 12th, when Patterson received casualty reports from Operation Nightfall, an attempted officer capture mission that resulted in 7 American deaths, 4 critical injuries, and 0 prisoners taken. The target escaped during the firefight. The resulting alert compromised 2 adjacent operations, and Intelligence Division received nothing except condolence letters to write. Patterson stared at those reports for 6 hours, drinking terrible army coffee and questioning every assumption about how modern warfare should function. At 06:45 hours, Patterson emerged from the tent and found Hewitt waiting, schematic still in hand. The corporal's patience finally registered as something beyond naive optimism. It suggested genuine conviction based on practical knowledge. Patterson had grown up in Boston, attended elite schools, graduated West Point with honors. His understanding of physics came from textbooks and theoretical courses. Hewitt's knowledge came from necessity, from years of making things work with limited resources, from understanding that theoretical physics became practical engineering when failure meant losing a harvest. "Show me," Patterson said simply, gesturing toward the training ground. Hewitt's design was deceptively simple. Heavy-duty rope, the kind used for parachute rigging, arranged in a concealed perimeter with tension calibrated to trigger when weight crossed specific points. The system operated on principles of mechanical advantage. A 180-pound man stepping into the trigger zone activated a counterweight system that deployed restraint loops at ankle and torso height simultaneously. The entire mechanism operated silently, required no electrical power, could be deployed in under 20 minutes, and functioned reliably in wet or dry conditions. The genius lay not in complexity, but in ruthless simplification. Traditional capture operations required coordination between multiple soldiers, precise timing, and close-quarters engagement where anything could go wrong. Hewitt's system operated automatically once deployed, requiring only one operator to monitor from concealment. The physics were unforgiving. Once triggered, the target had approximately 1.2 seconds before restraint loops achieved full tension. No human reaction time could overcome that mechanical certainty. Patterson watched Hewitt demonstrate the prototype using training dummies. The system functioned exactly as described: trigger activation, instantaneous deployment, secure restraint without injury. The Major's engineering background recognized immediately what his military training initially dismissed. This wasn't playground mechanics. This was practical application of mechanical engineering principles that European military tradition somehow overlooked in favor of overwhelming force. "The brass will never approve this," Patterson said quietly. "It violates every conventional doctrine about prisoner capture." "Sir," Hewitt replied with characteristic Midwest directness, "conventional doctrine is killing our men, while the intelligence officers we need escape. This works. I tested it 300 times on the farm. It never failed once when deployed correctly." Patterson made his decision. Military bureaucracy moved slowly. Americans were dying quickly. He had authority to approve field trials for experimental equipment. If the system failed, he would accept career consequences. If it succeeded, he would let results speak louder than doctrine. This was the American approach that won wars: pragmatism over tradition, innovation over convention, and willingness to let farm boys with practical knowledge challenge West Point assumptions. "You have 1 week to build 3 field-ready units," Patterson ordered. "We deploy behind enemy lines March 21st. If this fails, you return to standard duties and we never speak of it again. If it works—" He paused, considering implications. "If it works, Corporal, you might change how intelligence operations function for the rest of this war." Hewitt saluted, fighting back a grin that would be inappropriate but impossible to completely suppress. 5 minutes later, he was requisitioning rope, pulleys, and spring steel from the quartermaster, who questioned why a corporal needed parachute-grade equipment for unspecified purposes. Hewitt showed Patterson's authorization and said nothing more. Security protocols demanded silence. Success would speak for itself. By midnight, the first prototype lay disassembled in the workshop, components labeled and organized with farm boy precision. Hewitt worked under a single hanging bulb, surrounded by technical drawings that combined formal engineering notation with handwritten notes in the margins, calculations about rope strength, tension ratios, deployment angles, trigger sensitivity. This was American innovation at its most characteristic: practical knowledge meeting immediate necessity, unconstrained by bureaucratic hesitation or doctrinal rigidity. Outside, Fort Benning slept under Georgia stars. Inside the workshop, A Nebraska farm boy refined the system that would prove conventional military wisdom dangerously incomplete. He thought about his father, working late nights repairing equipment because hired mechanics were unaffordable. He thought about his brothers, deployed to the Pacific Theater, facing their own impossible challenges. And he worked through the night, driven by the stubborn determination that built a nation from wilderness and would not accept that Americans should die because military tradition valued complexity over effectiveness. March 21st, 1944, 245 hours. 6 kilometers behind enemy lines, Normandy countryside. 38 degrees, intermittent rain, smell of wet earth and distant artillery. The C-47 transport aircraft dropped 12 paratroopers into darkness over occupied France. Hewitt landed in a muddy field, gathered his parachute, and immediately began inventory. 3 rope trap systems, disassembled for transport, occupied most of his pack weight. Each component had been tested obsessively at Fort Benning. Now they would face operational reality under conditions where failure meant capture, interrogation, or death. Major Patterson had personally selected the team. 8 combat veterans, 2 intelligence specialists, 1 medic, and Hewitt. The mission profile was straightforward on paper, but brutally difficult in execution. Intelligence reports identified a German communications outpost 12 kilometers northwest, staffed by signals officers who possessed encryption information that Allied codebreakers desperately needed. Traditional assault would destroy the facility and kill everyone inside. Patterson's orders were explicit. Capture at least 1 officer alive, preferably more, without alerting nearby German positions. The team assembled in a drainage ditch, conducting equipment checks by shielded red flashlight. Sergeant Michael Torres from San Antonio questioned the rope systems immediately. "We're trusting farm boy engineering against professional German officers. This better work, Corporal, because if it doesn't, we're engaging with sidearms at close range, and those odds are terrible." Hewitt understood the skepticism. These men survived by trusting proven equipment and established tactics. His system was neither. But Patterson had given explicit orders. The rope traps would be primary capture method. Firearms were last resort only. The Major's reasoning was sound. Gunfire meant alerts, alerts meant reinforcements, reinforcements meant mission failure and probable casualties. Silence was survival. They moved through hedgerows using navigation skills developed through months of French countryside training. The terrain was murderous, dense vegetation, hidden ditches, unpredictable ground conditions. Everything was wet. Rain created mud that clung to boots and equipment, making every step exhausting. The German outpost occupied a farmhouse that pre-war maps identified as the Dubois family property. 3 structures around a central courtyard, surrounded by hedgerows that provided natural concealment. Reconnaissance from 200 meters revealed the operational pattern. 6 visible personnel, probably 8 total, including interior guards. Officers rotated outside for cigarette breaks following predictable schedule. Approximately every 90 minutes, 1 or 2 men emerged, spent 7 to 10 minutes smoking, then returned inside. German military culture valued routine and predictability. This cultural trait would become exploitable vulnerability. Hewitt selected deployment locations with farmers' understanding of terrain. The primary trap covered the pathway between the main building and the exterior latrine, a route every officer would eventually use. Secondary and tertiary traps covered alternate routes and potential escape paths. Each system required precise calibration for ground conditions. Wet soil meant different anchor requirements than dry ground. Tension calculations adjusted for mud's reduced friction coefficient. Deployment took 40 minutes instead of the planned 20. Wet rope behaved differently than dry. Knots required extra attention. Anchor points demanded deeper placement in saturated soil. Torres watched with growing respect as Hewitt adjusted each component, testing tension with practiced hands. making tiny modifications that transformed theoretical engineering into practical field equipment. This was craftsmanship developed through years of necessity, not classroom theory. By 2330 hours, all three systems were deployed and concealed. The team withdrew to observation positions 70 meters away, hidden in hedgerows, with clear sightlines to the target building. Now came the hardest part of any ambush operation, waiting in cold mud while rain gradually soaked through every layer of clothing, fighting the urge to move, staying alert despite exhaustion and discomfort. At 0047 hours, the farmhouse door opened. A German officer emerged, collar turned up against rain, moving directly toward the latrine path. He walked with the casual confidence of someone in supposedly secure territory, perhaps thinking about a warm bed, perhaps mentally drafting reports, certainly not expecting that American innovation waited 3 steps ahead. His boot crossed the trigger line. The system activated with mechanical precision that human coordination could never match. Restraint loops deployed simultaneously at ankle and torso height, achieving full tension in 1.1 seconds. The officer's forward momentum became leverage that worked against him. Attempting to step forward only tightened the ankle restraint, and his instinctive hand movement to catch himself encountered the torso loop exactly as designed. He fell forward into mud, restrained but uninjured, unable to cry out because the breath was knocked from his lungs by the controlled fall. Torres and 2 others moved immediately, covering the 30 meters in seconds. Chloroform, standard issue for prisoner operations, rendered the officer unconscious in less than 20 seconds. They dragged him into the hedgerows, secured him with conventional restraints, and reset Hewitt's trap system in under 4 minutes. The entire engagement occurred in near total silence. Inside the farmhouse, the remaining Germans noticed nothing. At 0124 hours, a second officer emerged, following the identical path. The system captured him with the same mechanical certainty. At 0001 hours, a third officer triggered the secondary trap while investigating why his colleagues hadn't returned. At 0243 hours, the fourth officer fell to the tertiary system deployed along the fence line. By 0320 hours, the team possessed 4 prisoners, all signals officers, all carrying documentation, all unconscious and restrained. The operation was succeeding beyond optimistic projections. But the real validation came at 0347 hours, when the senior officer emerged to investigate the suspicious absence of his entire staff. Major Wilhelm Hoffmann was a 20-year Wehrmacht veteran who survived the Eastern Front and earned his position through competence and caution. He moved carefully, sidearm drawn, aware that something was desperately wrong. His training and instinct made him dangerous. His predictability made him vulnerable. He avoided the primary pathway, circled toward the secondary trap location, and stepped directly into the perimeter that Hewitt had positioned for exactly this tactical response. The 5th capture was witnessed by the entire American team and represented the perfect validation of engineering over assumption. Hoffmann's caution, training, and experience meant nothing against a system that operated on physics rather than human reaction time. One moment he was a dangerous enemy combatant, the next he was falling into Norman mud, restrained by American farm boy innovation that his military academy training never anticipated. Extraction was textbook execution. 5 prisoners, 0 shots fired, 0 casualties, 0 alerts. The team moved south through pre-dawn darkness, carrying German officers who would wake hours later in Allied interrogation facilities, unable to comprehend how their entire command structure vanished without gunfire, explosions, or any indication of conventional military engagement. At 06:02 hours, the team reached the extraction point. Patterson's voice crackled over the radio. "Report status." Torres keyed the microphone. 5 packages secured, 0 defensive engagement. System performed exactly as designed. The farm boy was right, sir. The farm boy was absolutely right. In the growing dawn light, Hewitt sat against a tree, exhausted but quietly satisfied. His hands were muddy, his uniform soaked, his body aching from hours of cold tension. But he had proven something that military tradition resisted, that simple systems, properly applied, could achieve what complex tactics often failed to accomplish. That American innovation didn't require overwhelming resources. Sometimes it required only practical knowledge, stubborn determination, and willingness to challenge assumptions that everyone else accepted without question. April 8th, 1944. 14:30 hours. Wehrmacht Intelligence Headquarters, Paris. Clear skies, 61 degrees. Atmosphere of confused urgency. Oberst Friedrich von Schneider reviewed reports that made no tactical sense. 5 separate incidents in 3 weeks. 19 officers total, vanished without engagement, without gunfire, without any evidence of conventional military action. The pattern violated every understanding of American operational doctrine. Wehrmacht intelligence predicted American tactics with reliable accuracy. Aggressive frontal assault, overwhelming firepower, minimal subtlety. This was something entirely different, and von Schneider's inability to explain it was professionally threatening. The first incident received dismissal as aberration. Perhaps the officers defected. Perhaps they were drunk and wandered into minefields. Perhaps this was isolated incompetence. The second incident triggered mild concern. The third incident prompted urgent investigation. By the fifth incident, von Schneider faced questions from superiors in Berlin who wanted explanations that he could not provide. Physical evidence from the sites revealed almost nothing useful. Disturbed ground, rope fibers embedded in soil, impressions suggesting some kind of mechanical system. No shell casings, no explosive residue, no blood, no indication of armed confrontation. Officers simply vanished from supposedly secure positions, leaving behind only mud and confusion. Interrogation of nearby personnel revealed nothing, no sounds of combat, no American voices, no indication of enemy presence. One moment the officers were present, the next, they were gone. Von Schneider's background was Prussian Military Academy, 3 years on the Eastern Front, promotion through rigid hierarchical system that valued conventional excellence. His strategic framework assumed American forces operated according to established military doctrine: identify target, apply overwhelming force, accept casualties as inevitable cost of objective achievement. This doctrine was predictable, predictability was exploitable, and exploitation was how numerically inferior German forces maintained defensive effectiveness. But the vanishing officers represented something his framework couldn't accommodate. The American military supposedly consisted of enthusiastic amateurs, brave, well-equipped, but lacking the doctrinal sophistication and tactical subtlety of professional European military tradition. They won through industrial capacity and willingness to accept casualties that German forces couldn't sustain. They were not supposed to demonstrate surgical precision that outperformed Wehrmacht intelligence operations. Von Schneider called a meeting with his senior analysts, spreading reconnaissance photographs and incident reports across a massive oak table in an office that once belonged to French military intelligence. 6 officers studied the evidence with growing frustration. Every conventional explanation failed against accumulated data. Could this be French resistance, suggested Hauptmann Weber, responsible for counterinsurgency analysis? Perhaps they developed new abduction methods. The resistance uses different tactics, von Schneider replied. They ambush vehicles, sabotage rail lines, assassinate collaborators. They don't capture German officers alive for interrogation. And these incidents occur in areas where resistance activity is minimal. British commandos, offered another analyst, special operations teams with advanced training. British special operations leave evidence: small arms fire, knife wounds, some indication of close-quarters combat. These sites show none of that, and the British don't operate this frequently in these sectors. The room fell silent as officers confronted an uncomfortable conclusion. They didn't understand what they faced. This wasn't minor tactical uncertainty, this was fundamental gap in operational comprehension. Somewhere in the French countryside, American forces had developed a capability that Wehrmacht doctrine didn't predict and intelligence couldn't explain. What von Schneider couldn't know, because cultural assumptions prevented the consideration, was that American military innovation operated differently than European tradition. Wehrmacht doctrine descended from centuries of professional military culture, refined through Napoleonic conflicts, Prussian military theory, and 2 world wars. It was sophisticated, comprehensive, and remarkably effective. But it was also rigid, assuming that military problems required military solutions, that tactical challenges demanded complex responses, and that effective operations required extensive training and elaborate equipment. The American approach, shaped by frontier practicality and immigrant innovation, started from different assumptions: that simple solutions often outperformed complex systems, that practical knowledge could challenge theoretical doctrine, and that the best answer to impossible problems might come from farm boys who never attended military academies but understood physics through years of making things work with limited resources. On April 15th, von Schneider sent his analysis to Berlin. The report was professionally written, analytically sound, and fundamentally incomplete. He identified the pattern, quantified the losses, noted the unusual characteristics, and concluded with an honest admission: Wehrmacht intelligence could not explain American capability that produced these results. He recommended increased perimeter security, random patrol schedules, and elimination of predictable routine. These recommendations were tactically sound but strategically irrelevant. They addressed symptoms without understanding cause. The real threat wasn't American stealth or improved intelligence-gathering techniques. It was a fundamental philosophical difference about how problems should be solved. German military culture valued complexity, hierarchy, and doctrinal purity. American culture valued pragmatism, innovation, and willingness to let corporals with good ideas challenge majors with conventional wisdom. In Fort Benning and at forward bases across England, Patterson's reports travelled through intelligence channels, each one documenting another successful deployment of Hewitt's rope trap system. By late April, 17 American officers had requisitioned similar systems. Engineering teams refined the design based on field feedback. Training programs incorporated the new capability. And the system's effectiveness continued because German intelligence kept seeking complex explanations for simple innovation. The Wehrmacht's incomprehension became operational advantage. Every hour von Schneider spent analyzing these incidents was an hour not spent on genuine strategic threats. Every officer detailed to investigation was one fewer available for actual combat operations. And every failed attempt to explain American capability that operated outside German tactical framework demonstrated something that would ultimately define the war's outcome: that innovation constrained by doctrine would always lose to innovation constrained only by imagination and physics. Von Schneider never did solve the mystery. His reports grew increasingly frustrated through spring and summer of 1944, noting the continuing pattern but unable to provide actionable intelligence. His career survived, but his confidence didn't. The American military, he concluded, was less predictable than doctrinal analysis suggested, a conclusion that was accurate but incomplete. The real lesson, which he never quite grasped, was that American forces didn't need to be unpredictable. They simply needed to be practical in ways that European military tradition hadn't considered. September 1945, Fort Bragg, North Carolina. Clear skies, 74 degrees, atmosphere of exhausted victory. Captain James Hewitt, promoted twice for contributions to intelligence operations, stood in a hangar full of rope trap systems being inventoried and documented for military archives. The war was over. The systems that captured over 300 enemy personnel would soon be museum pieces, historical footnotes about unconventional tactics that proved effective in specific circumstances. But the real legacy wasn't the equipment, it was the transformation in thinking that Farm Boy innovation triggered. The immediate impact was quantifiable. Hewitt systems directly enabled the capture of 347 enemy personnel, including 89 officers who possessed actionable intelligence. The information extracted from these prisoners contributed to operational planning for the Normandy expansion, the liberation of Paris, and the final push into Germany. Countless American lives were saved because commanders possessed accurate intelligence instead of operating on educated guesses. Multiple German defensive positions were neutralized before they could inflict casualties because captured officers revealed deployment patterns, communication protocols, and strategic vulnerabilities. But numbers told only part of the story. The real transformation involved challenging assumptions about how innovation should occur. Traditional military procurement followed rigid patterns: identify need, contract established defense manufacturers, wait for complex solutions that required months of development and millions in budget allocation. Hewitt's rope trap demonstrated alternative approach, recognized that practical knowledge existed outside formal channels, empower non-commissioned personnel to contribute beyond their assigned roles, value simplicity over complexity, and implement solutions that worked immediately rather than theoretically elegant approaches that required extensive development. Major General Thomas Hendricks, now responsible for post-war special operations doctrine, personally reviewed the rope trap program for lessons that transcended the specific technology. His report to the Joint Chiefs identified systematic issues. We nearly dismissed the most effective intelligence-gathering tool of the European theater because it came from a corporal rather than a colonel, because it violated conventional doctrine rather than reinforcing it, and because it seemed too simple to be militarily legitimate. How many other innovations did we reject because they didn't fit our expectations about how warfare should function? The question haunted military leadership during post-war reorganization. The atomic bomb demonstrated that American scientific capability could produce world-changing weapons. But Hewitt's rope trap demonstrated something equally important: that American innovation culture could solve tactical problems that theoretical sophistication somehow overlooked. The combination of these capabilities, massive technological programs, and grassroots practical innovation, created competitive advantage that no enemy could match. Hewitt himself remained characteristically modest about his contribution. When reporters approached him for interviews during victory celebrations, he deflected credit. "I built rope systems using principles my father taught me on a wheat farm. Major Patterson took the career risk to let me try. Sergeant Torres and his team operated them perfectly under impossible conditions. This wasn't one person's achievement. This was America working the way America works best, giving people freedom to try new approaches and backing them up when they take initiative." The personal aftermath was complicated. Hewitt received the Bronze Star for his contributions, but declined opportunities for permanent military career. He returned to Nebraska in late 1945, married his childhood sweetheart Sarah, and took over operation of the family farm. His wartime innovations weren't discussed publicly for 30 years due to ongoing classification of intelligence operations. Neighbors knew he served in Europe, earned decorations for unspecified contributions, and came home when millions of other American servicemen did the same. But the declassification process in 1975 finally revealed the story. A military historian researching unconventional tactics discovered the rope trap program in archived documents, interviewed surviving team members, and published comprehensive analysis that made headlines. "Nebraska Farm Boy's simple system captured hundreds, changed military doctrine." Hewitt was 73 when the story broke, still operating the family farm with his sons, still using practical knowledge and improvised solutions to solve everyday challenges. The late recognition brought speaking invitations, documentary interviews, and renewed military attention. Hewitt accepted some opportunities and declined others, always emphasizing the same message. Innovation doesn't require genius, it requires freedom to try approaches that conventional wisdom dismisses, combined with determination to make things work, despite skepticism. America won that war because we gave farm boys, factory workers, scientists and soldiers permission to solve problems their own way, instead of mandating solutions from the top down. Modern special operations forces still study Hewitt's rope trap program, not for the specific technology, which became obsolete as warfare evolved, but for the philosophical approach it represented. Military academies use it as case study about organizational culture, innovation processes, and the danger of assuming that complex problems always require complex solutions. Engineering programs analyze it as example of practical application of physics principles under resource constraints. Leadership courses examine Major Patterson's decision to authorize unauthorized innovation despite potential career consequences. The farmhouse workshop where Hewitt built the first prototypes still stands outside Grand Island, Nebraska. It's now privately owned, but marked with historical designation, noting its role in World War II intelligence operations. The original schematics hang in the National Museum of American History, displayed alongside explanatory text about how farm equipment expertise translated into military innovation that conventional military engineering somehow overlooked. Hewitt passed away in 2003 at age 82. Surrounded by 3 generations of family on land his grandparents homesteaded in the 1880s. His obituary in the Grand Island Independent noted his military service, his Bronze Star, and his decades of community involvement. But the final paragraph captured his most important legacy. Jim Hewitt represented the American belief that practical knowledge deserves equal respect to theoretical expertise, that determination can overcome institutional skepticism, and that the best solution to impossible problems might come from unexpected sources if we're wise enough to listen and brave enough to let people try. The rope trap systems themselves exist now only in museum collections and military archives. But the principle they demonstrated remains operationally relevant, that American innovation culture, combining grassroots practical knowledge with institutional willingness to challenge convention, creates capabilities that opponents trained in rigid doctrinal traditions struggle to anticipate or counter. This was true in 1944, when Wehrmacht intelligence couldn't explain mysterious officer disappearances. It remained true throughout the Cold War, the Gulf conflicts, and modern special operations that continue to value initiative, adaptation, and the uniquely American confidence that good ideas deserve implementation regardless of their source. In the end, they laughed at his rope swing ambush trap, until it worked, until it kept working, until it forced everyone to question assumptions about how military problems should be solved, and until it became a permanent reminder that innovation without institutional permission is sometimes exactly what determination and desperate circumstances require. What impossible problems could we solve if we stopped demanding that solutions come from expected sources? This story reminds us that American ingenuity isn't about credentials, it's about practical knowledge, determination, and freedom to try approaches that conventional wisdom dismisses. If this story made you think differently about innovation and determination, subscribe to this channel for more untold Boop-Tood stories that reveal how ordinary Americans achieved extraordinary things. Drop a comment sharing any family stories about wartime innovation or unconventional problem solving. These histories deserve remembrance.